everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everyone, whether you're Pacific Division attendee or you're across the nation that are joining us. Welcome, team. Thank you so much for joining us for season 2 of the Pacific Division Sheltering Capacity Building series. It's a long list of words that I'm going to say. With all of your support, last season that we had, it was almost the same time. Last year, we started February the 10th. We had 24 sessions that went through for 6 months, and we had 5,084 attendees across the nation. And one of the biggest highlight for our presentations were how to be a great shelter SV, and how to be a great shelter SA stands for service associates and supervisors. So today we welcome Roxanne and Jody back again to talk with us with the same topics. So some of the housekeeping stuff and some of the background. So everyone is muted currently except the presenters and myself. I disabled your mic and also your camera. We learned very early on last season that if we have such a big group of people, when we have everyone turn on their cameras and mic, it's very difficult to manage and we don't have the bandwidth. But the chat is open, and when we get to the Q&A sections, we will go ahead and turn on the microphone so you are able to ask questions. This meeting is being recorded. It will be sent out afterwards with slides. It will get published also to YouTube channels so everyone can see it. No access is required. You don't need to have a Red Cross email address. I encourage everyone to say hi in the chat and tell me your name and the regions you're from so we really can say hi. And I want to share the goal of this Pacific Division series. Number one of the goals is that we really want to build our workforce confidence. We really want to provide the practical tips for mass care sheltering operations, including any lessons that we learned from Ian. So I did a session last year and 24 sessions of them. And I was deployed to Ian for the initial period as the headquarters sheltering manager. And it was during that time I'm thinking, oh my God, there were so many things that we didn't touch on for Ian or for anything for new volunteers or experienced volunteers. So we are going to cover more of the basic stuff in this season. Also, we want to provide a collaborative environment across all functions. We often hear the word stay in your lane, and I really like what Debbie Leahy from SoCal region said the other day was that we do want to stay in our lane, but there are times we really need to communicate with each other and other functions. So during that time, turn your flicker, turn your signal to let the other function know that, hey, we're coming, so we can communicate better and we can function better. Of the next objectives or the goals is that to provide a networking opportunities for all of our regions, whether you're from Alaska or Hawaii or Pacific Islands, or whether you're from Idaho, Montana, or my home region, Los Angeles, or SoCal region, we welcome you all. And you might see familiar faces in this group. And we really encourage you to chat with each other afterwards, maybe text a friend, maybe that you deployed with someone in Ian, then you met them again. I encourage you to chat with each other and keep, so you have the friendship. So now, my name is Yiwei Chen, and I tell people how to pronounce my name is that think of Liwei, replace the L with a Y, so you get Yiwei. I'm a volunteer. I joined in 2009. I am the Mass Care Regional Program Lead in Los Angeles. And today's presenter will be Jody Wallace and Roxanne Morris. Jody Wallace is from Northern California coastal region. She is the mass care chief, and she's a very, very experienced sheltering manager. And we also have Roxanne Morris. She's also from NCCR, Northern California coastal region, and she's a very, very experienced shelter supervisor as well. So both Jody and Roxanne, they were recently deployed to the California floods up north that covers the whole entire state of California. They bring experience to us that what they've learned in their DR's disaster relief operation for the floods, and also they bring the experiences from Hurricane Ian. I think many of us deployed to Hurricane Ian. It was a very, very tough deployment. It was very challenging, but at the same time, we really learned a lot. And we really want to incorporate everything that we learned into all the sessions that we're going to provide. So this is going to be a 10-week session or series. It's going to be every Wednesday at 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock Pacific time. It will be recorded. You can go back anytime to view it. Also, there's no prerequisite for this training. So if you're not a shelter supervisor or a shelter service associate, that's totally fine. We welcome everyone. If you haven't taken any EDGE trainings, those are also fine. This course or this presentation has absolutely no prerequisition. We really want to encourage everyone to attend, whether you're a very experienced mass care chief or whether this is your first time taking a Red Cross presentation workshop. You will always find something in this presentation. I myself learned a lot during all the past presentations. It was each session I learned something new. And I see Mariana Thomas. Welcome, Mariana Thomas, for joining us. So let me turn this back to Roxanne and Jody. Please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. We are coming to live from Shelterland. Jody and I are very excited to be here once again and to talk about our great love of all things sheltering. And I think the only thing better than working and being in a shelter is helping others do great work in shelters. And so we feel very privileged and very honored to join you once again and to talk about our favorite subject and to really help others do great work in and having like the best experience possible. And so we come to you again with some great tips and tricks on what makes a great shelter service associate. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Just a little bit more like housekeeping. We're very curious to know what your primary gap is in your date of your last deployment, if you had a chance to deploy this past year. We just like to get a sense of the folks who are attending, just if it's a lot of SAs, a lot of SVs, a mix of everything. And then, of course, everyone's going to be muted and have their video off. And again, the chat is available for questions that we can answer at the end. As mentioned before, Jody Wallace and I have a lot of sheltering experience. I love this photo of Jody. She's the one in the Red Cross vest, but it's always nice just to get a sense of what we look like. And then myself, I'm Roxanne here, and I'm making the weird face on the right hand side. So let's start. How to be a great shelter service associate. It's a pretty simple statement, simple question, but there's a lot of nuances, and it can be pretty complex, much like our shelters. And so you can kind of think of it as this. Great shelter service associates, they do two things. They strive for a rewarding personal experience during deployment, and they also provide high quality and caring service for our clients. And for today's session, we are going to be talking about some of the general things you want to keep in mind before and during your deployment. And then the next session, we're going to really dive into what are some things that you should be thinking about and doing to provide that high quality service while you're in the shelter. So to start, let's go over a few things that we mentioned last time, which I think is worth repeating. Tips for a rewarding personal experience. You definitely want to understand the expectations for your assignment. And you also want to manage your expectations. Leave assumptions and ego at home. Definitely practice self-care. Take initiative and ask questions whenever possible. And look for opportunity to learn and, of course, make friends. So let's start. Before you're actually on the ground for the operation, consider this before saying yes. What type of disaster is this going to be? Where would I be deploying? How big is the response? When would I be deploying? What is the average weather conditions for the area? And what are my requirements and needs? So if we use an example, and to answer these following questions, let's say, hey, the disaster is gonna be a hurricane, and let's go to Florida, and it will be a level 7 response. And it will be in the first wave, meaning that you will be deployed within the first 2 to 3 weeks of when an operation starts. And I will explain a little later why this is important to keep in mind. And of course, we're thinking Florida, we're thinking hot, wet, humid, stormy, severe winds, things of that sort. And then what would be some of my requirements and needs? So, for example, let's say I need electricity for a CPAP machine. So, this all relates to something called hardship codes. And these serve as guidance for you to understand what type of operation that you would be deploying to. Uh, so they provide guidance on any issues that you may run into on an operation. And it's very important to understand your own needs to determine when you should deploy. So, for example, a lack of electricity to run medical devices, poor air quality for those with breathing issues, or walking and stairs for those with mobility issues. These are important considerations, especially at the start of large disasters. And you should note that hardship codes may change as the operation progresses, and they depend a lot on how and if and when services are brought back online. This may allow those who are unable to deploy initially at the beginning now actually be available to help. So listed here, these are the hardship codes. They can be found on the exchange. And there's a lot of detail in terms of what they describe, and I won't read every single one. But this is a very powerful tool to help you make an informed and qualified decision for when you deploy. And so moving on, we're going to be talking about another important topic, sharing cars and driving etiquette, and Jody's going to take over.
Roxanne, before you proceed, you mentioned a term earlier that you said, Hurricane Ian, and you mentioned level 7. Could you tell us a little bit about what those levels mean and what does level 7 mean?
Yeah, actually, Jody, would you like to answer that?
Actually, that either one. Sure, we can touch on it a minute. So levels are, I just drew a total blank here. How about that? Most things start on local, say something within your territory, your region, something small. Things start as a level 2. There are various factors that go into determining how levels are increased. Oh my God, I'm totally stupid. Chuck.
No problem. I'll take it. I'll take it. Sorry, I threw that question too.
I'm drawing a blank here.
No problem. So for everyone that is not familiar with the levels, so in Red Cross we have multiple levels of disaster relief operations, DROs, and the 7 is being the highest. So when we say level 1 or level 2, those are local level disasters. Level 1 is anything the budget amount or the cost is going to be under 10,000. Level 2 is anywhere above 10,000 to 50,000. When you get to level 3 and 4 and 5, those are division levels. So let's say this is Pacific Division, we have division levels. Then when you have level 6 and 7, meaning that the whole operation is organized and charged by national operations. So for Hurricane Ian, it was NICT, the National Incident Command Team, and the proposed budget or the initial cost exceeded $10 million. And that's what level 7 is. Basically, when a level 7, you will think of Hurricane Ian, you will think of Hurricane Harvey. That's basically what we put into whether it's your human resources, the material resources, in the geography, how much territories that we have to cover, how much resources that we need to pull, how much damage it costs for the clients, and how long the recovery takes. So it tells us how big of operation it is. And for level 7, it's the highest that you can have. And I think our Timothy Dahlem, one of our assistant director of information planning, posted the levels on there. Okay, Jody, now back to you.
That was an excellent explanation. And I totally just drew a blank on that. So thank you. And the levels are really important because when you start looking at your deployment, when you're getting on these high levels, you're looking at a very big disaster, which can be something very different to consider for experience wise, right? If you're able to get some experience on some of your local disasters, something smaller, it's always a nice way to start to help building your skills and building your confidence, so that when you're out on these 5, 6, 7, right, you have a better idea of what the expectations are. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about cars and driving etiquette. And as Roxanne said, what our intent on this first session is, we're going to kind of take you guys back and make sure that everyone is very familiar and comfortable with some of the nuts and bolts that we all need to know just in general. And a lot of these things apply regardless if you're doing sheltering or you're doing feeding or something like that. So we just want to make sure that everyone has a really nice, clear understanding on some of these other items. Cars are really important, and we get a lot of questions about cars. We a lot of times can have some not necessarily conflicts, but misunderstanding on how exactly things work with cars. So it's really important to understand that a lot of times we will just receive a text and it says, hey, we've got a car in your name that reserved at the airport, please pick it up. And we are being assigned temporarily that vehicle, but it's not ours. It's a way to help get a car and volunteers coming into the operation to headquarters. So you may be sent a list of names that says, hey, please make sure that you meet up and also take these people with you in the car to get to headquarters. And again, this is a way to get a vehicle to headquarters, where you will then be turning the vehicle into transportation. And then what they do is, based on the needs of an activity such as mass care, they will determine who is getting a car, how cars are distributed. So this is really important because, one, what this means is that although you are driving people to headquarters together, this isn't necessarily the team that you're going to be assigned with. Also, what that means is that you're not necessarily going to be having a car that is assigned to you. All right. Now, once something is determined that, hey, we need to get a team over to this shelter, and I'm going to pick Sue Smith. Okay, Sue, we're just going to have your name on this car. You go to transportation and they assign it. That car is within the activity, right? So it now is assigned to mass care, right? That means that it's something that can be used by other volunteers to cover days off, or anyone really with a driver's license can drive that vehicle. So the important thing to remember is that even if you have the keys to a car, this is not your personal vehicle. It belongs to the activity, it belongs to Red Cross, and cars are always meant to be shared. What this also means, particularly when we get in big disasters, and a lot of times we've got shortages of vehicles, is that it's important to try and carpool together. So if you guys are working in the same shelter, how do we get everybody transported to and from their work site together? And sometimes what that means is you may not all be staying at the same lodging location. You may have to go to a different place to pick up other people to take them with you. But it's really important to always make sure that everybody has a ride. Had a couple instances actually in Florida to where I had been told that people had missed shifts because they couldn't find a ride. So back when I started many years ago, the rule always was, if you were getting ready to leave to head to your shift, or your shift was done and you were getting ready to head back for the night, is that you look around and ask, hey, does anybody need a ride? Where are you staying? I've got a vehicle. What we don't want is we don't want a car with one person in it or two people, particularly if we're short with vehicles. So please make sure that if you have a car, right, we want you to look around and say, hey, is there anybody else that's going where I'm going? All right, next slide, please.
Jody, before you go, we have
Of
several
course.
questions that we want to touch on.
Okay.
So one of the questions that I know you answered, but I wanted you to emphasize one more time, as we learned from Hurricane Ian that, the basics we need to emphasize multiple times for people to get through it and understand. So Jane asked you a challenging question, as in, what if that I don't drive? Or what if I don't want to pick up the rental car? What do I do?
And so we do have volunteers that do deploy, that don't drive. And I'll be honest, there are some times when it has created a problem because we don't necessarily know this beforehand. But if you are somebody who wants to deploy and you don't drive, we will make arrangements so that you are buddied up with someone to make sure that you can get to and from your work site as well as to and from your lodging. It's one of those things that please make sure when you are accepting the assignment and you talk to your workforce person that you could mention it, so that way we sort of have a heads up. And I'm sorry, what was the other one?
The other question is
you
that
don't want to pick one up.
right. Or that, is there any way that to let you know or let the operation know that I don't drive? Or if there's anyone that I can call and contact and say, hey, I'm already at the airport. So and so is supposed to pick me up, but I don't have this so and so. So whom can you call to get that rearranged? Let's say this is my first appointment. I don't know what to do. I didn't receive any texts or phone calls. Is there anyone that I can call?
You know what? The first time or two that I went out and I wasn't quite sure, I actually called the staffing number that showed up on the IAP looking for help. And just because there was a time, I think my second or third one, that I was supposed to be with someone and that person just took off. So I kind of was stuck there. So I called the 24-hour staffing number, explained my situation. They said, give us a couple minutes, we will call you back. So make sure that you reach out for assistance and use that staffing number.
Okay. And where can they find the staffing number? Is it by text? Is it on the assignment sheet that they originally received?
Hopefully, once you've been assigned, you will start getting the IAP, which is the Incident Action Plan, which should be coming via your email, as well as there should be a number that comes out on your assignment paper that basically says, this is where you're going and this is where you're reporting to. So that number should be in either one of those. And the other thing is, if you're at the airport, particularly if you're new or even if you're experienced, look around, right? Because most of the time, those of us who deploy, we're in a Red Cross t-shirt or we're in a Red Cross baseball cap or something. So look around for other people and reach out to them and see, because I may actually have been assigned a car and you're looking around going, how do I get back to headquarters? So reach out to other Red Crossers that you may see upon arrival as well.
Perfect, thank you. So I know some of us are asking questions in the chat, and some of us asking questions are really teasing the question out. So, because we have, a lot of new volunteers here. And again, we don't know what we don't know. So feel free to ask questions. And if you're experienced, I welcome you to tease the question out so we can answer. And I do want to emphasize that we did split this session to two. So it's 1 hour for today, another hour for next week. And for the third Wednesday and the fourth Wednesday of February, it's going to be shelter SVs, and we broke down to 2 sessions as well. Okay, back to you, Jody, and we'll cover more questions later on as well.
Great. Okay, next slide, please. Hurry up and wait. I think this is one of mine and Roxanne's most very favorite phrases. This is really, really important, and this is where your patience and understanding really come into play. Particularly when we're dealing with a large operation or we're just starting something up within, the first wave. There are a lot of pieces that we are trying to pull together. So even though you have agreed, hey, I want to go, I want to do this, I'm ready, right? You hit the airport, you arrive, okay, now what? I'm ready to go. What we really need is for you to be patient and understanding, and remember that it takes time for us to make the decisions on what shelters need to be opened or where we're going to send teams. It takes a bit to put the right teams together. Okay, I have to make sure I've got a supervisor. Do I have a shelter manager? How many SAs? And to get all the details worked out. Do I have cars to get these teams where I need to get them? So what we really need is that you keep these important things in mind. Our objective is that we want to try and get you out the door where we need you as soon as possible, but there are times that may take several hours. So you have to be patient, and particularly with lodging. So when we have you working at a shelter, for example, and we decide that we need to move you elsewhere, part of, in addition to moving your team to a new shelter location, we need to put in a request to get your lodging. In most cases, if you're going a farther distance, then we have to put in a request to move your lodging as well. It sounds easy, but it's more complex than that. And it's not unusual for it to take 6-8 hours once we put in the request for an answer to come back and let you know where your new lodging is. So again, this is something that we need for you to be patient with. Bear with us. We promise that we're not, the objective is not to have people be frustrated. It's that we want to make sure we know where you're going, who you're going with, where you're sleeping, and how you are getting there. Okay. Next slide, please. And lodging. Again, one of Roxanne and mine's favorite subjects to talk about.
Absolutely.
When you are deployed, particularly on these very large deployments, all right, you can expect to be put up and sleeping in a staff shelter, all right? And that can be anywhere from, 50 people to, couple hundred, all right? And what you will be getting is we're going to fix you up with a cot and a couple blankets, just like we would if you were a client. So what your responsibility is, always be prepared to sleep in a staff shelter. Sometimes it works out and we're not. Maybe it works out and they found a couple hotels and we can be put in staying there, and I'm always very appreciative. But my rule is I always plan for the worst, hope for the best. That means these are the things that I'm going to make sure that I am bringing with me to make me more comfortable in a staff shelter. Right? Earplugs and sleep masks, very important. Shower shoes, sleepwear. One thing about sleepwear, please give thought to what you bring with you to sleep in. I have been at a couple shelters in the past, and let's just say what people brought was probably not appropriate to be sleeping with 100 of their closest friends and neighbors. So please think about what you are bringing with you. Sleeping bag, blanket. Things tend to be colder, cooler, because there are a lot of people in there, and a lot of facilities would rather have extra blankets on people, right? So it may be cool. A flashlight if you're getting up and walking around at night. I always bring a power strip. I make sure that I put my name on it. You want something that's got lots of outlets. There's a lot of people and you're going to have to share things. So power strips really, really come in handy. You probably have your own list of things. You can talk to people that you also know if you're new and get suggestions on items to pack. But the most important thing is that we need you to, in the back of your mind, walk into an operation knowing this is a disaster and there's a really big chance I will be sleeping in a staff shelter. The other thing is, a lot of people, right, we've got to cover night shift. So if you are if it's a day off or you're hanging out for whatever reason, night shift people, they're sleeping during the daytime. So please be considerate. Sometimes we are able to set night shift people up in an area that might be a little more quiet, but a lot of times we're working night shift and we're right in the middle of all the cots. So please keep that in mind when you're walking around talking and laughing, that we're going to be going on starting at 7 o'clock at night, and we really need to get that sleep. All right, next slide, please. Last day worked. This can be really, really confusing, so I'm hoping when I wrote this up in my explanation will help clear a few things up. When somebody comes into headquarters, one of the first questions that you generally will get asked is, when is the last day that you are working? This is very important because keeping track of the last shift you are working allows us to help make sure that we are putting in staff requests so that we don't come up short people, to make sure that we can cover the shifts and provide the clients the care they deserve. And we can only do that if we've got enough staff to cover it. Where this can get a little tricky, the paperwork that you get when you agree to deploy basically has got 14 days on it. That includes your flying days. All right. So when I ask Roxanne, hey, I need to know what is the last day you are working, she can look at her paper and say, well, my last day here shows as February 14th. So my last day that I'm working is February 13th. All right. Now, depending on how far you are from an airport, that you may have to have a conversation a little bit with your supervisor. But please remember, it's the last day that you are physically working, and it's a full shift. We definitely had problems, particularly in Florida, where people were not only going home early, but they would only work half a day. And so we were desperately trying to figure out what was going on. There were so many people that even though we had asked several times, what is the last day you're working, they weren't looking at this. All right, so very important. Next slide. All right, couple more things about it. So again, if you're working a day shift, you generally can schedule to fly home the following day. Again, if you are working in a very rural area, you're going to have to get to an airport that's a couple-hour drive, something to talk about with your supervisor. Night shift is a little bit different. Most of us, when I work night shift and I get off in the morning, I want to go to sleep, right? I'm going to crash. And what I'm doing now is I want to go home the following day. Now, I've known a couple people that literally have gotten off shifts and gotten on an airplane, but that's not the way my body or my brain works. So I'm going to work my night shift. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to book it for the following day. So your last day worked is going to be a little bit different. You're not leaving the following day. This can be a little bit confusing, but keep it in mind. Remember that when you get your instructions that you print out, right, from Workforce, that is the total time that you are committing to make, right? And so when I say, hey, Roxanne, what's your last day working? Look at it, back it up. If you need some help, and this is your first time, say, well, this is what my paperwork says. Can you kind of help me out? We would much rather answer the question and help you understand how this works, because again, it can be tricky, especially your first couple times. And the other thing is, please, When you agree to deploy, you are making a commitment that you are providing 2 weeks of your time to help in an operation, and you are needed for those 2 weeks. We understand that there are always extenuating circumstances, and there are times that people do have to go home. But we ask, right, please give thought to the fact that, okay, I am committing for 2 weeks of this. Is this something that I am doing? If you run into a problem, talk to your supervisor. But we just want to make sure you understand that we count on you when we are looking at our teams, when we are figuring out how to provide the best care to our clients. And so having you there and knowing I have you for a specific amount of days is critical. Next slide, please.
Hey, Jody, I have a
Oh,
question.
yes.
So what if I deploy for 2 weeks and I really want to take my day off at the end? Could I perhaps change my last day worked and get off a little sooner?
I like that. All right, so good point. Days off. You are supposed to get 1 day off a week. And this is something that all shelter managers and supervisors start looking at literally when they are opening a shelter. There's a couple things regarding days off. One is, please understand, especially on big operations, you may not be able to take the day off with your friend that you've made over there. That may not always be possible, right? So please remember why you are there. The other thing is we schedule people working on who we have and what our needs are. So you are entitled, and we absolutely want someone to take a day off. But what we don't do is say, well, I'm supposed to be leaving on Thursday, so I think I'm just going to take Wednesday as my day off, right? It doesn't work that way. Please remember that. Please keep in mind, again, why we are there to take care of our clients, and that we need to make sure that we have all of our shifts covered accordingly, right? Do not determine by yourself, well, I'm taking off this day. Please talk to your supervisor and say, hey, I know that I'm supposed to get a day off, and I was wondering, how does this work, or when can I do it? But we really, really discourage, and we really don't want you saying I'm taking the day off before I'm leaving, because that may leave me shorthanded.
Jody, I have one question, actually two, before you continue. One is, does the 2 weeks deployment including the travel time?
It does, actually. So your deployment does include your travel time, the day that you are flying, and your both ways. I do things a little different, but I'm a little weird. When I deploy, I want to be there for 14 days working. And so my deployments, and this is me personally, are generally at least 16 days, because my flying day to the operation and my flying day back home, there's nothing I can do. That pretty much wipes out the day. So for me, I don't count my travel time. Again, that's just the way I schedule my time, right? But you are committing for 14 days, and your 14 days do include your 2 days flying.
Got it. Thank you. And I have one other question. Some of us might be wondering that, we're talking about shelter workers. We're talking about how to be a great sheltering workers. And how come we're talking about this, working conditions or whatnot? And can you elaborate a little bit more that, when I ask you to do this specific session and to talk about lessons learned, why did we think that this is important for our first session to bring to everyone that this is so important and we wanted to emphasize so many times?
Absolutely. So this session is definitely different than what Roxanne and I presented last year. So we have made adjustments, and it has become a 2-part session. But what we saw, particularly for many of us who deployed to Ian, is that there are a lot of new volunteers who are they want to help, they're very excited, but there's a lot of stuff they just don't know. They haven't been told. It just doesn't always work that way. So these are some of the nuances that are very important for anybody who deploys, and they will apply for any disaster you work to, and they will also apply for any gap. Regardless if I'm in feeding or recovery, my last day worked is still going to be figured out the same. How things work with lodging, exactly, it's going to be the same. So we wanted to provide you with, again, what I consider the nuts and bolts of deployments in general. These are things that you will keep in mind no matter how many times that you deploy. So we wanted to provide this information to you before we start getting into, hey, how do you set up a shelter and how do you close down a shelter, right? Because there are a lot of new volunteers coming on, and we want to help make you confident that when you go on these deployments, you understand how some of these items work beforehand. And you may know things that you have picked up, so when you run into somebody else who is new and is unsure, you can say, oh, no problem, I can help you out.
Thank you so much, Jody. And I want to put in my 2 cents as well, that the reason that I asked Jody to do this specific one and to incorporate and tweak the session that she did last year was that in Hurricane Ian, like I said earlier, I was deployed for the initial wave. That meaning that it was pre-landfall and post-landfall for the first 14 days as the HQ sheltering manager. And to give you some numbers, that during that time when I was on the ground, we had, I think, approximately 1,600 people on the ground, and more than 600 people in the shelter workforce in my group. And one of the most frustrating things for both the leadership team in the headquarters and also for the people out in the field is that they don't know what their assignments are. They don't have cars, they don't have transportations, they don't have lodgings, they don't know when they're going to expect their deployment, the assignments. They don't know that a shelter opens at night. They have to work at night shifts. And they didn't know that they can get a day off, that people are getting assignments, etc. So there were a lot of unknowns, and those were really the ones that threw people off, that people left because they didn't get assignments. We didn't know, myself included, that I lost 40 some people one day because people didn't know that they were supposed to check in with the operation and also to get assignments from the job that they assigned instead of some other jobs. So this is really the main reason that we're really focusing on this and back to the basics of how to deploy. And again, no question is too silly or too naive or anything. We've all been new. I mean, still to this date, even that I'm experienced, I still have questions. So there's always some questions that we can, ask, and someone that we can ask. And each question is important. And that is really the focus, that why we're deciding to put this as the very, very first session and break it down to 2 sessions for this how to be a great shelter essay. So thank you so much, Jody. Back to you. Thank you.
Okay, how about next slide, Roxanne? Okay, we're going to take a minute. We're going to talk about field promotions, because there definitely is confusion, and sometimes even among people that have deployed even more than a few times. So let's say hypothetically that I deploy out as a shelter associate and I get out to the operation, and it may turn out that we are shorthanded. We are opening more shelters than anticipated, or we just didn't get all the supervisors in yet that we are expecting. So somebody may tap me and say, look, we're going to field promote you. I need you to be the supervisor, or I need you to be the shelter manager. What's important to understand is a field promotion is a temporary position that only applies to the operation that you are at, only for that time being. So the reason this is important is that there have been more than a few times that I've had people come up to me and say, okay, well, I was field promoted to a supervisor last time, but so I'm a supervisor now. And you have to explain, no, actually, that's not really the case. It was a temporary promotion. Now, if you do that job, if I go out and they say, hey, will you be the shelter manager? And I go out and I do the job, my evaluation that should be written, it should reflect the fact that, hey, I did this position, right? And it's an evaluation that will be put into my file and kept there. So at the time that I have completed any classes to be a supervisor, or as well as additional deployments, and I'm ready to apply to be a supervisor, they already have a couple evaluations in there showing that, hey, I did this job, right? So I'm capable of it. So we just want you to know that sometimes you may be field promoted to a higher position, and that's great, as long as you understand that does not change your gap in volunteer connection. It will still be up to you to take the classes that you need to apply for a promotion, and you still need to get more experience under your belt, right? But we always want good people to be able to promote, right? But there's a proper way to do that. So please remember that when you go home, that position only applied to that particular operation. I'm going to ask if there's any questions, just because that's kind of an important one.
Yes, there is. And I wanted to say something else as well. So I talked about earlier, as in, I lost people, etc. And we have multiple people saying that they were deployed as shelter service associates. Then they went to LSAP, which is life safety and assets protection. So number one question is, can you change your group activity and position or deployment assigned function? And if you do, can you just say, I want to do this and not notifying anyone, or do you have to go through certain processes?
Yeah, so there absolutely is a process. And a lot of times we've had multiple deployments, including Ian, to where, let's say we start closing shelters, but we may have a need for people to either do damage assessment, or maybe we're trying to do distribution of emergency supplies. And somebody may come to me and say, hey, do you have anybody who you think would like to do this? Or maybe they have an SA gap in this. And we can talk to people. And if I go to Roxanne and I say, hey, are you interested in doing damage assessment? And she says, oh, that would be great. It has to be done correctly. It has to be okayed through who at headquarters, the shelter lead has to say, yes, I'm willing to let this person go to another activity. And then the person who is accepting is agreeing, yes, this is something that I want. I could use this person for. It's very, very important that you do not decide, I want to go do this other activity, and off you go. Again, our needs are always taking care of the clients. And that is, I know how many people I've got on a team of shelter workers. And if somebody decides on their own to just disappear and go to a different function, now I'm shorthanded. I can't provide the same care that I am anticipating. So there is a way to do a transfer to a different group, right? If you may be asked, or if there's something else that you're interested in, you can also come and ask, but it has to be done properly.
Thank you, Jody. And the proper way, really, it involves paperwork, right? It involves paperwork, and it involves both the headquarters, like Jody said, the headquarters person that in charge of that function, whether it's damage assessments manager or sheltering manager, they have to approve that. Both functions has to approve it. It can't be just, I want to go to another activity, then I can just go. But at the same time, I do want to remind everyone to be flexible, because, I'm sure reported on there that the needs change, situation change, shelter status change, the operation overall goal changes as well. So that be flexible, but again, always ask for authorization approvals for the correct personnel, because sometimes, you might be asking your peer, say, hey, can I go ahead and move to another function? Or you might be asking for your home territory to say, hey, can I move? They probably will say yes, or they'll say they don't know, but those are not the appropriate or the proper personnel. Thank you so much, Jody. We can proceed.
One last thing on this. The other thing is, it's really important to understand that when you deploy, you take that spot for, say, a shelter service associate. When you hit headquarters, that is the spot that you have taken, right? That is the spot that I am planning on. So it's really important. We occasionally have issues with people that want to go out, and what their specific activity is may not be available yet. And so they will show up and say, well, no, really, I'm not here for this. I came out for disaster assessment. So let me be real honest. I dealt with this more than a few times. If you come out under my shelter staff request, you're mine, and that's what you will belong to. Doesn't matter if you've got arrangements with somebody else that you know who's there or not. When you agree to take that place, sheltering at headquarters is counting on you. And until sheltering headquarters lead agrees that you can go to a different activity, that's what you're there to do. Because we are all shelter workers when needed. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, very important, self-assignment versus reassignment. And we had a lot of issues of this in Florida. Again, right? Sometimes we go out and I may spend my entire deployment in one shelter. I've done that a lot. But I've also been in deployments to where I have literally worked 4, 5, or 6 different shelters depending on the circumstances and what the needs are. And what's important to understand is just because a shelter is closing, that doesn't mean that we don't need you elsewhere. That just means, okay, this shelter is closing. We need to reassess where the next need is. How are we dividing up teams? All right. What we want to make sure is that that you are talking to your supervisor if you have been told that your shelter is closing, right? Hey, I just want to make sure. I know we're closing tomorrow. What will I be doing next, right? And if your supervisor has not gotten back to you, say it again. Hey, I want to make sure. It is so very important. One, do not self-assign yourself to another shelter because a friend called up and said, hey, come over, we could use help. And please, please don't book a flight home without talking to your supervisor. We had more than a couple cases of that in Florida, and it was, new people don't always know, right? It's, as they say, you don't know what you don't know. So their shelter they were working at closed, and so in their mind, they just booked a flight, and we literally were on the phone going, hey, where are you? And the answer was, oh, I got home yesterday. And I'm thinking that this person is ready for reassignment. So it's really important. Again, we talked about that 2-week commitment. So we want to make sure if your shelter is closing, just ask your supervisor, hey, I want to make sure that there are plans. Where am I going next? The other thing is you may have worked and been part of a team at this shelter, but I may find that I have a need and I'm going to send you and one other person to this other shelter, and I'm going to send people off who you worked with that team prior. They're going to go somewhere else. So again, it comes down to that flexibility. We need to move you where there is a need in order to provide that care to our clients. Any questions about that one?
No,
Okay.
and I want to remind Jody that we have 6 minutes left for this session.
Yep. I think we're getting close. Roxanne, next slide. Okay, this will be our last slide. Especially for new people, it's very, very important. We want you to understand night shift. We provide care 24 hours every day of the week, including holidays. So we have to cover night shift. That means you have a very high probability of being assigned to a night shift. For Roxanne and I, we have the best stories and the best times about when we have worked night shift. This is truly your best opportunity to get to know your clients, because during the daytime, people are generally gone. Nobody's hanging out at the shelter. But in the evening, people are back. Families are back. If you really want to get to know your clients, you want to hear their stories, and you want to build the rapport, those hours from, say, 5 o'clock till when we turn off the lights around 10, those truly will give you some of the best opportunities and the best memories on that shift. So if you are assigned to night shift, please don't think of it as a bad thing, because it's not. I mean, truly, some of my best memories of shelters have been people that I've been able to just sit and talk to or play with the kids in the evenings. But we want you to understand, night shift is not a punishment. I actually had some guy say that to me. Night shift is not a punishment. You need to change your perspective and see it for what it is, which is a really fabulous opportunity to build some bonds with your clients and really hear their stories up close and personal. I guarantee you don't get that same quality of time or even quantity of meeting people during the day shift. I think that kind of looks like a good place to stop.
Perfect, Jody. Thank you. We have some questions, and I think one of them is the important one that also, goes back to what we experienced in Ian, is that when you're deployed and you're either a couple or your family, will they ever be separated? Let's say one person, let's just say that both of them, they're shelter workers, they're shelter service associates. Will you ever separate a couple?
We do. And actually, to be really honest, I've had husband and wives who have come out and they say, we don't want to work together. But then,
it's true.
Right? It's true. We love our spouses, but I don't want to work with you. And there are times that, yes, we've got people that come out and they're like, nope, we're a team. So if you have your significant other and you guys like to deploy together as a team, we absolutely can accommodate that. That's not a problem at all.
Thank you so much, Jody. And I do pretty much the same thing, that if I'm the person assigning, if they mention to me they're a couple, I'll definitely accommodate. But again, like what we mentioned earlier, that we don't have any control over when the shelters will be closing and reopening. And because of closing and opening, the time frame and the magnitude of people, they're always different. So it's really hard for us to adjust. And one more thing that I want to touch on is that if you didn't get an assignment for a few days or whatnot, feel free to come down to the headquarters or text the person or call the person that is in charge of sheltering and say, hey, I haven't been assigned. Can I get assignments? Plenty of times that it happened to us, happened to me during Hurricane Ian, that people are texting me, say, hey, my friend or so-and-so that I worked with is deploying in this and she's really good in this. Can you use her in any capacity? And we bring them in right away. So it's really that, it's not only that, again, the reach of the communication is not one way. It's not just only the headquarters to the field, it's also the field to the headquarters and then the field to the home region to get all the support that you need. I unmuted everyone. I'm unmuted. I give you the option to unmute if you want to ask any questions. And in the same time, I want to remind everyone the next session is going to be the same time next Wednesday. It will also be Jody and Roxanne, and for the rest of the month. So the 4 sessions that we're going to do, the first 2 sessions was today and next week, is going to be how to be a great shelter service associates. The next 3 and 4 sessions will be how to be a great shelter service, shelter supervisors. And I saw a lot of comments on, are we going to touch on evaluations? Are we going to touch on volunteer connection apps? Are we going to touch on other aspects? Yes, we will. In March and in April, we will touch on shelter resident transition that will be presented by Cynthia Fisher. We will also touch on the deployment aspect. It will be something similar, but it will go into more details as in what are you going to do after you get assignments. And feel free to jump off and raise your hand or come off mute to ask questions. And thank you so much, Jody and Roxanne, for presenting, for preparing. I know it was a lot of work. To give you everyone an idea, this one, Jody and I met several times just to talk about what topics to talk about. Then Jody and Roxanne met multiple times this week and for the past weeks just to talk about what to add on and what to tweak, etc. So it was a lot of work. And also housekeeping is that I want to give numbers again that so in Pacific Division, we have 3,430 volunteers that has a sheltering gap. And among those, we have 2,568 people that has sheltering gap as their primary gap, the group and activity position, meaning that that's what they usually deployed as. And I sent emails to every single one of you. So sometimes you might receive 2 emails from me because one email was covered for the past attendees. The other email that was for the division email that's sent to everyone. So I see that it's 7 o'clock. We can stay on a few minutes late. If anyone has any questions, feel free to come off mute.
Okay, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Debbie, go ahead.
When we were at Ian, the first day we were there, our teams worked for the briefing, said, the twice a day briefing. And then suddenly it stopped working. And there was 2 people out of, I think, 30 of us that could actually pull it up. And we kept hearing it was a technical problem. They'd get to it. By the time we left, it was still the same thing. We could not watch it on either iPads or on phones. And we kept hearing it's a technical issue. It will be dealt with. Has there anything happened with that? Because I still can't use it on my phone. Safari, for some reason, something changed to where Safari will no longer pick it up. And so we were never able to watch the briefing.
I have Safari, and I don't think that's the issue because I have no problem with my phone.
My
With
one
Teams.
suggestion is, Debbie, is I had to do this before last year, is I would say, take it off your phone and re-download it. That helped me when I had problems.
What do you mean re-download it?
You're talking about you can't pull it up on the Teams app, correct?
Well, they'd send us a link, and when we click on the link, our entire shift, I think there was one person who could get it, and she had a laptop. And
download the app onto your phone and do it from the app, not from Safari.
Okay, because no one told us about that. So we're all going, we can't watch it. All right, so there's a specific app.
Yeah, Microsoft Teams. You can get it in the Apple Store, the App Store, or Android. And once you have the app on your phone, it makes connections so much easier. Using the browser does not give you as many options as the app does.
Now, is that listed somewhere? Because none of us knew that.
So Debbie, that's a perfect question. And that's something that we're also going to address in one of our sessions. So I encourage you to attend our sessions. So one of the things that we usually tell people, well, I say usually because I tell my folks, but it doesn't mean that every single time that we deploy is consistent across the region or division. So number one that we suggest people when they deploy is they get a Red Cross email. That's number one, because as a guest versus a Red Cross email, the user functions were different. Number two is we suggest people to download the app itself instead of using the link because apps give you more features. Number three is that if you're having problems downloading the stuff or going to using the link, there is a dial-in option that you can do the phone dial-in, just enter the numbers that you can go ahead and dial into, you can, listen to it better. But again, it will be covered again in the sessions that when we're going to talk about deployments and what to do once you get a call and you get assignments, etc. Those will be covered again. Okay, Do we have any more questions?
I have a
Okay,
quick question.
go ahead.
When we went to Ian, many of us, 50 or more, were at the hotel in Tampa for like 5 days. Do they come out and realize where we are, or in headquarters they know, or some people were taking the initiative to contact headquarters themselves? So it got to be really confusing for everybody as we were hurry up and wait.
So I think I can answer this question. I was the headquarters sheltering manager during that specific time that you're mentioning. So what happened was, and this is one of the main reason that we want to do this session and other sessions afterwards, was that we had an issue with volunteer connection. There were multiple issues that prevented us. That honestly, if you were going to ask me if I knew you were there, I probably didn't know that you were there. And the gap or the glitches were number one, people didn't, I don't mean you or your group, but I mean in general that people didn't check into the operation. They checked into the hotel, but they didn't check into the operation. That means that at the headquarters, we didn't know the folks, they arrived already. That's number one. Number two, the gap was that when they checked in, their gap, the group activity and position, it might not be sheltering. It might be something else. But they were deployed as shelter workers because we had a different DR, disaster relief operation. It was the Ghost DR that they created virtual standby. So those data didn't get transferred to the current DR accurately. So we didn't know people were there. Then the third one was that all the people that listed because of the volunteer connection app, that is something new that this year, I shouldn't say this year, last year or this fiscal year that it happened. The location, the reporting structures were not clear. So then people were reporting at different locations that we think they're assigned, but they're not because the volunteer connection wasn't showing accurately. And then the fourth one was that we had so many shelter and opening and closing, opening and closing. One day, I think just the morning within 3 hours, I had 20 shelter opening and closing with 1,000 people each. So those were the gaps and the difficulties that we had, that we couldn't reach to all the volunteers and staff that they were staying at the hotel.
So when I went in as sheltering and I ended up being assigned as a pop-up down on that island of Pine Island, there were 6 volunteers and we had 3 cars and we were following a truck. It felt kind of wasteful. Who would we notify, or is that just the supervisor's responsibility?
So that part, it would be notifying either the supervisor or direct supervisor or staff, staffing the number when you checked in for the staffing. The best way I would really say on an operation will be the sheltering function. So usually, so let's, for example, for my team, I was the headquarters sheltering manager. I had multiple assistant managers. Then I had a team of 5 people that were doing call downs to do assignments. So I had 5 people. So then those were published on the incident action plan, the IAPs that you get daily. So then I would say that call them directly. So then they know where to assign you. Because one of the biggest piece and the reason that I really wanted to do this session was that we had trouble with people were not staying at the same hotels. They didn't have transportation. We had to scramble last minute to pair them up together, as in whom to go where. And that was one of the biggest piece. And some people, they just decided to go somewhere else because their friends are there, or their cars are there, or their hotels are there for other reasons. And that's what I would think that would happen with your thing with, 3 cars with 2 people each and 6, instead of just 1 car or 2.
Okay, thank you. I know everything is a challenge, so I appreciate what you did.
It is. And I think that's really the goal of this session or this series, is really to make sure the next deployment that we have, it can be a little bit smoother. It's not going to be smooth, it's not going to be just completely everything goes as what you want. But at least I think with our sessions or series that we can make life of the volunteers out in the field and the staff out in the field or the headquarters personnel a little more relaxed and feel a little bit more supported, because I think some of the stuff we're not talked about it. We were, it was a very big disaster. We hired people out to do all those services and whatnot, but we didn't prepare our workforce well enough or in a timely manner. So this is really the goal of this series. And thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you. And I think we should conclude this session. I will send all the emails out later on. Probably give me a week or so. I will send out before the next meeting. And if there's any more questions, I really urge you or encourage you to use the chat function. I'm going to monitor the chat, and we'll go ahead and answer as many questions as possible. Thank you so much, Jody, and thank you so much, Roxanne. And the Ding Dong
Pleasure.
sisters are here. Thank you so much, Diane, for coming, and all my LA folks for joining me as well.
Thank you guys for participating.
Thank you.
It was great. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.
I love you, Jody, and Roxanne, and Cynthia,
Jody.
and everyone. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Yue. Your programs are always excellent.
Oh, thank you.